On 20.
Series title, Streets That Remember Heaven, an episodic Chicago testimony series by Brother Jesse Mayfield. Series premise. Chicago is a city that remembers everything. Its streets remember prayers whispered in the cold. Its buildings remember hymns sung in basements and storefront churches. Its alleys remember tears that never made the news. This episodic series follows ordinary Chicagoans across different neighborhoods, generations, and seasons, each encountering moments where heaven interrupts daily life, not with spectacle, but with truth, conviction, mercy, and calling. Every episode stands alone, yet together they reveal one unified testimony: God has never abandoned the city, and he still walks its streets through those willing to listen. Scripture is not quoted as decoration, but lived out, echoing passages such as Micah chapter 6 verse 8, Matthew chapter 5 verse 14, and Hebrews chapter 13 verse 8. Episode 1. The Bus Stop on 79th Street. The bus stop had been there longer than most people remembered. Its bench was scratched with names, dates, and half-forgotten promises. Some carved hearts, others carved anger. Every winter it froze. Every summer it baked. And every morning, it gathered souls who believed they were only waiting on transportation. But heaven knew better. On this particular morning, the city was quiet in that rare Chicago way, the kind of quiet that feels borrowed. A man named Calvin stood at the stop, collar pulled up, Bible tucked under his arm, unopened for weeks. He had once preached with fire. Now he barely prayed with breath. Calvin stared down the street as if answers arrived on schedule. They never did. An elderly woman sat beside him. Her coat was thin. Her eyes were sharp. She hummed a hymn he had not heard since childhood. Jesus paid it all, she sang softly. Calvin shifted uncomfortably. She turned to him and smiled. Funny thing about waiting, she said, God does most of his work there. Calvin said nothing. The bus was late. So was his obedience. She pointed at the Bible under his arm. You carrying food, she asked, or just the menu? That question landed heavier than any sermon he had ever preached. Scripture echoed in his spirit, James chapter 1 verse 22, but be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. The woman stood just as the bus arrived. Before boarding, she leaned close and whispered, Chicago does not need louder churches. It needs braver believers. The doors closed. The bus pulled away. Calvin was left standing. The city moved again. Cars passed. Wind shifted. But something had changed. Not around him, but within him. For the first time in years, he opened the Bible. Not to prepare a message, but to obey one. The bus stop remained. The city remembered. And heaven smiled. Author's note. This series is not about Chicago as a backdrop. It is about Chicago as a witness. As written in Psalm 127 verse 1, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. And yet, God keeps building anyway, one soul, one street, one obedient moment at a time. Episode 2. Midnight at the L Platform. The L Platform was never meant to be quiet. Even at midnight, it breathed. Steel hummed. Wind rushed through concrete corridors like a restless prayer. Somewhere below, the city groaned, not in pain, but in persistence. Marcus stood near the yellow line, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the dark tunnel ahead. He had ridden these trains his whole life. South side to north side. Job to job. Season to season. Tonight felt different, though he could not explain why. He had just left a late shift. His phone buzzed with unanswered messages from people he no longer knew how to help. His faith had become something he referenced, not something he relied on. Above him, flickering lights buzzed like tired witnesses. Marcus leaned against a pillar tagged with graffiti, words layered over words, truth buried beneath noise. He exhaled and whispered a prayer he had not planned to pray. Lord, I am tired. The platform answered with silence. Then footsteps. A young man approached, no coat despite the cold, carrying a backpack worn thin. He paced near the edge, restless, eyes darting. Something about his movement unsettled Marcus. The train was late. Again. The young man muttered to himself. Words tumbled out, sharp, heavy, hopeless. I cannot do this anymore. Marcus froze. Scripture stirred in his memory. Proverbs chapter 24 verse 11. Deliver those who are drawn toward death, and hold back those stumbling to the slaughter. He did not want to intervene. He was exhausted. He was unsure. He was afraid of saying the wrong thing. But the Spirit does not always wait for comfort. Marcus stepped closer. You all right, brother? The young man laughed, hollow and sharp. No. But it did not matter. The wind roared through the tunnel. Somewhere in the distance, metal screeched. Marcus remembered another verse, one his grandmother used to say when life cornered her. 2 Timothy chapter 1 verse 7. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, and of love, and of a sound mind. He spoke quietly. It matters more than you think. The young man turned, eyes wet, guarded. You do not even know me. Marcus nodded. But God does. The words surprised them both. Minutes passed. The train did not come. The platform held its breath. They talked. Not about theology. Not about answers. Just about pain, loss, mistakes, and the weight of feeling invisible in a city that never sleeps. When the train finally arrived, its lights cutting through the darkness, the young man stepped back from the edge. He boarded without another word. Before the doors closed, he looked back and said, "Thank you for seeing me." The train vanished into the tunnel. Marcus sat on the bench, heart pounding. Scripture echoed again. Matthew chapter 5 verse 9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. The platform returned to its noise. The city resumed its rhythm. But heaven had already passed through. Marcus stood, knowing something had shifted. Not because he preached. Not because he fixed anything. But because he showed up when obedience whispered. The L platform remained. The city remembered. And another soul was still here. Episode 3. The Church That Never Closed. The church sat on the corner like it had always been there. Brick worn smooth by decades of weather. Wooden doors darkened by the touch of countless hands. The sign out front still read, Sunday worship 10:30 a.m., though everyone in the neighborhood knew the doors had not truly closed in years. Lights burned inside long after midnight. Miss Ruth held the keys. She had inherited them unofficially, the way faith often passes, without ceremony, without announcement, just responsibility. The original pastor had gone home to be with the Lord. The congregation had scattered. Some moved away. Some stopped believing. Some simply got tired. But Miss Ruth stayed. Every morning she unlocked the doors. Every night she locked them again. In between, the church breathed. On this particular evening, rain tapped against the stained glass, distorting the colors into moving rivers of red and gold. A young mother slipped inside with two children, soaked and shivering. A man followed shortly after, limping, eyes down. Later came a teenager who said nothing and sat in the back pew. Miss Ruth did not ask questions. She brewed coffee. She laid out folded blankets. She turned on the sanctuary lights, not all of them, just enough. Scripture lived in her bones. Hebrews chapter 13 verse 2. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. The church was not loud. There was no sermon scheduled. No choir rehearsal. No program. Still, God arrived. The teenager stared at the cross hanging above the pulpit. I did not think anyone cared anymore, he said quietly. Miss Ruth smiled, setting a cup of coffee down near him. The building is old, she replied, but the mercy is new every morning. Her words echoed Lamentations chapter 3 verses 22 through 23, though she did not quote them aloud. The man with the limp asked if he could pray. Not for himself, but for his brother who had not made it through the winter. The young mother wept silently, holding her children close. Miss Ruth stood at the pulpit, not to preach, but to agree. For where two or three are gathered together in my name, she whispered, remembering Matthew chapter 18 verse 20, there am I in the midst of them. The rain slowed. The city outside kept moving. Sirens passed. Buses groaned. Somewhere nearby, laughter broke through the night. Inside, peace settled. No offering was taken. No altar call was made. No one joined a membership roll. Yet the church was full. When the night ended, the visitors left one by one, lighter than when they arrived. Miss Ruth turned off the lights, locked the doors, and rested her forehead against the wood for a moment. Thank you, she whispered. The church remained. Not because of a crowd. Not because of a budget. But because obedience still lived there. As written in 1 Corinthians chapter 3 verse 16, know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you. The building stood quiet again. The city remembered. Heaven took note. And the church, once more, never truly closed. Episode 4, A Prayer Under the L Tracks. The space beneath the L tracks was never quiet. Even when trains were not passing, the metal above seemed to remember movement. Rusted beams loomed overhead like ribs, holding up years of commutes, conversations, and unanswered prayers. Tanya stood beneath it all, hands shoved deep into her coat pockets, breath visible in the cold air. She had chosen this spot on purpose. This was where her brother used to wait for her after school. This was where arguments ended and reconciliations began. This was where she had last seen him alive. The city had moved on. She had not. Above her, a train thundered past, shaking dust loose from the beams. The sound pressed against her chest, forcing memories to rise. Lord, she whispered, unsure if he still listened here, I do not know how to forgive this. Her words fell into the concrete. Scripture surfaced quietly. Psalm 34 verse 18. The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, and saveth such as be of a contrite spirit. Tanya slid down the pillar until she was sitting on the cold ground. She had tried everything else, distraction, anger, silence. None of it had healed the ache. Footsteps echoed nearby. An older man approached, carrying a plastic bag filled with cans. His coat was frayed. His walk slow. He stopped when he noticed her tears. You all right, sister? He asked gently. She shook her head. He did not press. He simply sat a few feet away, respecting the weight of the moment. After a while, he spoke again. I pray under here sometimes, he said. Feels like God hears better when the world is loud. Tanya let out a shaky breath, half laugh, half sob. Another train roared overhead. The man bowed his head. Mind if I pray with you? She hesitated, then nodded. He did not pray fancy words. He did not try to fix her pain. He asked God to hold what she could not carry. He asked for peace to grow where bitterness had taken root. He asked for courage to forgive, not because it was easy, but because it was freeing. Scripture lived in his prayer. Matthew chapter 5 verse 44. Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you, and persecute you. When he finished, the tracks fell quiet for a moment. Tanya wiped her face. I still hurt, she admitted. The man nodded. Healing usually starts like that. He stood, picked up his bag, and walked away without giving his name. Tanya remained under the tracks a little longer. She did not have all the answers. She did not feel whole. But something had shifted. She whispered one more prayer. Help me let go. Above her, the city kept moving. Trains passed. Lives crossed. Time continued. Yet beneath it all, forgiveness had taken its first breath. As written in Romans chapter 12 verse 19, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Tanya stood, steadier than before. The tracks remained. The city remembered. And a prayer spoken beneath steel rose all the way to heaven. Episode 5. When the lake refused to be silent. Lake Michigan stretched wide and gray that morning. The wind rolled across the water, carrying the sound of waves striking stone, steady and relentless. Joggers passed. Cyclists rode by. The city rose behind it all, glass and steel reflecting a pale sky. David stood near the edge, hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee gone cold. This was where he came when his thoughts grew too loud. He had been raised to believe that strength meant silence. Men did not cry. Faith did not question. Doubt stayed hidden. But grief has a way of surfacing no matter how deep it is buried. The lake watched him. David's father had taught him how to fish here. Had taught him how to pray, too, though neither of them talked much about God after his mother passed. Over time, church became occasional. Prayer became brief. Faith became something remembered, not practiced. A wave crashed harder than the rest, splashing against the rocks. David closed his eyes. Lord, He said quietly, "I do not know how to carry this anymore." The wind answered before words did. Scripture rose uninvited. Psalm 42 verse 7. Deep calleth unto deep at the noise of thy waterspouts, all thy waves and thy billows are gone over me. David felt it in his chest. The lake was not calm. Neither was he. Nearby, a woman stood with a sketchbook, charcoal smudged across her fingers. She had been drawing the water, capturing movement rather than detail. She glanced over at David, then back at the lake. "It never stays quiet for long," she said, gesturing toward the waves. "That is how it survives." David nodded slowly. She closed her sketchbook. "Sometimes we think peace means stillness," she continued. "But sometimes it means letting the noise out." Her words landed gently. David looked back at the water. Tears came, unannounced and unashamed. He did not wipe them away. He let the lake witness what he had hidden for too long. Scripture echoed again. Matthew chapter 5 verse 4. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. The wind softened. The waves slowed, not stopping, just easing. David exhaled. When he opened his eyes, the woman was gone. Joggers passed again. The city resumed its pace. But something remained. He whispered a prayer of thanks, not because everything was fixed, but because he was no longer alone with it. The lake stretched on, vast and patient. As written in Isaiah chapter 43 verse 2, "When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee." David turned back toward the city, heart lighter, steps steadier. The lake remained. The city remembered. And grief, once buried, had finally been heard. Episode 6, The Day the Sirens Stopped. Chicago was never without sound. Sirens were part of its language. Distant, constant, weaving through neighborhoods like an unending chorus. People learned to sleep through them, to talk over them, to live alongside them. Until the day they stopped. It was not announced. No alert went out. No headline explained it. The city simply noticed, slowly, like realizing the wind has died down. On the west side, Ms. Alvarez paused mid-sentence while speaking to her neighbor. Downtown, a street vendor looked up from his cart. On the south side, a classroom of children grew unusually still. The silence felt heavy, not peaceful, but attentive. Eli was driving when he noticed it. Windows down, radio off, waiting at a red light that seemed to last longer than usual. He listened. Nothing. No sirens. No urgency screaming through the streets. Just engines idling and people breathing. His chest tightened. Eli had been a first responder once. Years ago. Long enough to know what sirens meant, and what their absence could stir. He pulled over and shut off the engine. Scripture surfaced unbidden. Psalm 46 verse 10. Be still, and know that I am God. The city was still. People stepped outside of storefronts. Conversations paused. Even the trains seemed to move softer, as if respecting something unseen. A woman crossed herself on the sidewalk. A man bowed his head. A group of teenagers stood silent, unsure why. Somewhere, a church bell rang once. Eli leaned against his car, eyes closed. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of everything he had carried. Lives saved, lives lost, prayers shouted over chaos. The silence did not erase the pain, but it made space for it. A stranger stood beside him, neither speaking. Minutes passed. Then a siren sounded in the distance. One. Clear. Necessary. Life resumed. Cars moved. Voices returned. The city exhaled. But something had been marked. Scripture lingered. Habakkuk chapter 2 verse 20. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. Eli started his car, hands steady. He did not know why the sirens had stopped. He did not need to. He knew what the pause had done. It reminded a city accustomed to noise that God still interrupts. Not always with thunder, but sometimes with stillness. The streets filled again. The rhythms returned. Yet for those who noticed, the memory remained. The day the sirens stopped, the city listened. And heaven was not silent at all. Episode 7. A letter left on the pulpit. The sanctuary was empty. Sunlight filtered through stained glass, laying patches of blue and amber across the pews. Dust drifted in the air, slow and unbothered. The building was quiet in the way that invites honesty. Pastor Raymond stood alone near the pulpit. He had arrived early, as he always did on Sundays. Not to rehearse a sermon, but to sit. Years ago, he had learned that God often spoke before the congregation ever arrived. As he placed his Bible down, something caught his eye. An envelope. Plain. White. No name. Just one word written carefully across the front. For the church. Pastor Raymond hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a letter, handwritten, ink pressed deep into the page as if the writer needed the words to stay. It spoke of sitting in the back pew for years, unseen but not untouched. It spoke of sermons that challenged and silences that healed. It confessed doubt, anger, and a long season of walking away, followed by an even longer road back. The letter thanked the church for staying open, not just the doors, but the hearts. Pastor Raymond felt his throat tighten. Scripture stirred. 2 Corinthians chapter 3 verse 2. Ye are our epistle written in our hearts, known and read of all men. He folded the letter carefully and placed it back on the pulpit. The sanctuary filled slowly. Familiar faces. New ones. Some weary. Some hopeful. Some still deciding. When it was time to preach, Pastor Raymond did not begin with his prepared notes. He held up the envelope. This, he said, voice steady, is why we remain. He did not read the letter aloud. He did not need to. Its truth moved through the room without words. We may never know every life touched here, he continued. But God does. Scripture echoed again. Isaiah chapter 55 verse 11. So shall my word be that goeth forth out of my mouth, it shall not return unto me void. The congregation sat quietly. Some nodded. Some wiped tears. Some bowed their heads. After service, the envelope remained on the pulpit. People passed it without touching it, understanding its sacredness. Outside, the city moved as it always did. Inside, something settled. The church did not grow louder that day. It grew deeper. As written in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 11, wherefore comfort yourselves together, and edify one another. The letter stayed where it was left. The pulpit bore witness. The church remembered. And what had been written in secret strengthened many. Episode 8. The city watches a seed grow. Spring arrived quietly in Chicago. Not with fanfare, not with headlines, but in small signs. Buds pushing through cracked sidewalks, birds nesting beneath the L tracks, sunlight glinting off Lake Michigan. The city was waking in ways most people didn't notice. Jesse, a young man who had passed the bus stop on 79th Street countless times, walked slowly down the sidewalk. He carried no Bible today, only the memory of lessons learned from strangers, from prayers overheard, from moments of mercy. Every street he passed reminded him of the lives intersecting there. Calvin at the bus stop, Marcus at the L platform, Miss Ruth keeping the church doors open, Tanya praying under the steel tracks, David listening to the lake, Eli noticing the stillness of sirens, and the anonymous letter left on the pulpit. Each had planted a seed. He looked at the city, listening for its heartbeat. It was subtle, gentle, but unmistakable. Scripture rose within him. Galatians chapter 6 verse 9. And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap, if we faint not. He saw a boy helping an elderly woman across the street. A young mother teaching her child to say, "Thank you," to a stranger. A man kneeling quietly on a park bench in prayer. Seeds sprouting everywhere, unseen by most, yet alive. Jesse realized something. The work had never been about recognition. It had never been about grand gestures or headlines. It was about obedience, consistency, faithfulness in small acts. The city had been bearing witness. Each story, each prayer, each moment of mercy was like soil turned, watered, waiting for growth. He paused at the top of a small hill overlooking the city. Trains rumbled below. The lake stretched wide and patient. Buildings reflected sunlight in fractured patterns. And then he understood. The seeds were growing. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But inevitably. Life multiplied where love had been sown. Forgiveness flowered where hurt had been held. Hope breathed where despair had lingered. Scripture whispered again. Isaiah chapter 60 verse 1. Arise, shine, for thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. Jesse lifted his hands toward the city, not in triumph, but in surrender. This city, these streets, these lives, he prayed silently, let them bear fruit for your kingdom, O Lord. The wind shifted. The lake reflected the sunlight like molten gold. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, soft, respectful, returning to its place. And the city watched. It watched the seeds grow. It remembered the prayers, the sacrifices, the silent faithfulness of those who had gone before. Heaven smiled quietly over Chicago. The streets, the buses, the platforms, the churches, the tracks, the lake, they were witnesses to the truth. God's kingdom grows, often unnoticed, always faithful, wherever obedience meets mercy. As written in Matthew chapter 13 verse 30, let both grow together until the harvest, and in the time of harvest I will say to the reapers, gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. Jesse turned and walked down the street. Not a single dramatic moment. Not a single fanfare. Only faith in motion. Chicago continued to hum. The city remembered. Heaven worked. The seed had grown.